Trade talks are really starting to heat up for the Toronto Maple Leafs. A brand new report has dropped surrounding one player that reveals a lot surrounding Brad Treliving's next move. We're going to break that down as well as discuss some other very interesting Leafs updates as Brad Treliving prepares for something big. But before we get into all that, folks, if you're part of the percentage who aren't subscribed to the channel, about 70% of you who are watching right now aren't subscribed. Make sure to hit the subscribe button. Thank you guys again for your continued support. There's a lot to go over today, and some more reports have dropped, this time surrounding a name we haven't touched on too much on this channel, and it is an interesting one. And obviously, Brad Treliving continues to prepare for a big rest of the offseason and obviously peruse the trade market. But let's dive into an interesting name today, and it is Casey Mittelstadt. A new report dropped just a few days ago revealing that Casey Mittelstadt could be on the move, according to multiple sources here. And for the first time, and it seems now that players' names are starting to be brought out more than usual as we enter towards the end of August. It was pretty quiet there for most of July and even the start of August regarding actual names being available. So now that we actually have some names available, I think Brad Treliving's job might get a little bit easier here as teams are actually starting to become willing to making a move. And of course, the Leafs are always going to be linked. There's been some writers, some reports linking the Leafs to, of course, a lot of top six wingers, top six centers, everything. And now, of course, that is no different. And you can see the full report here from another report, rather, from an NHL executive regarding Casey Mittelstadt. You see it in the bottom tweet. There was a common feeling that he wasn't their main target when they traded him. Zellers in the second round pick were. So clearly they don't have a ton of attachment to Mittelstadt, who is, an elite talent. However, could he actually be, an elite player? Or is he going to be an elite player going forward? That's the big question. But Darius, this is a very interesting one, and a lot of talks surrounding this player. And of course, we would assume the Leafs are involved.
Yeah, and it's been one of the quietest summers, at least to start in recent memory. This is more what I'm used to. Like last year, we kept hearing this player's available, this player's available. Nothing really happened for a little bit until it did near the end of the summer, but this is more what we're used to. So obviously more players seem like they're becoming available. Casey Mittelstadt's an interesting one. Obviously went over to the Boston Bruins in the Charlie Coyle trade, last trade deadline. And again, like mentioned there, that the Bruins were obviously more interested in the other pieces in the trade than Casey Mittelstadt. But I think he's an interesting player. And we mentioned him briefly in our Pavel Zacha video and how that could fit the Maple Leafs. Casey Mittelstadt, I don't think necessarily fits the Maple Leafs, but let's take a look at it because it could actually make some sense for the Leafs. This guy is a smaller, young-ish playmaker in the league that can put up a ton of assists, can dish the puck. He hasn't even realized his full potential. I don't think there's so many people across the league that say, like, if he, just took it to another level, which he still can, he just hasn't unlocked it, but he does at times. If he's able to do that consistently, is what I'm trying to say, then he can be a premier center in the league, but he just hasn't been able to unlock that level yet. And I think that's kind of worrisome because he is creeping up on 26, 27 years old. And personally, I think that once players hit that kind of 24, 25-year-old range, that's just what they are at that point. Like I find it hard to believe, and it's always possible, but I find it hard to believe, at least consistently, a player is going to change the way that he plays, at 26, 27. I feel like they are just the player that they are, but he's an interesting player. I feel like he could put up a lot of points with the Maple Leafs, of course. Faster foot speed than probably John Tavares. A lot of what we talked about before, maybe you move Tavares to the wing in play. Tavares would take faceoffs. Mittelstadt can kind of play center in play, something like that. If you do acquire a player like this, you would be getting him to play second line center. So that can make some sense moving into the future because that's something you're going to have to start thinking about as Tavares gets a little bit older. But again, not really an issue this year, maybe even next year. But I think it's an interesting option, but ultimately I don't think he fits in with what the Leafs are trying to accomplish, their play style. Like I don't think he fits into the team stylistically, but there's some other things we'll get to that, could make some sense.
Yeah, and obviously when any name becomes available, the Leafs are the most aggressive team in the trade market. And you're looking at Casey Mittelstadt. He has another year left on his deal after this one, coming off of a 40-point season last year in the regular season. However, there is something to keep in mind here is that he's cap hit is 5 point. He's a player who's making a lot of money, $5.75 million. So the Leafs would have to send that out and, of course, move off of some other guys, which is the highlight of this offseason. Still the storyline remaining is who they're going to trade, whether that be David Kampf, Kelly Yarncroke, or more in this case, to obviously make up the $5.75 million. They're about 1.9 under the cap right now, but it's interesting. There's been some rumblings about a lot of different teams here. You're talking about Mason McTavish signing a trade from Mittelstadt and a pick, just to give you an idea of what a trade value could look like for the Leafs. And I'll ask you this in a second, Darius, based on the player, who would you assume the actual capital being given up is? Now, does he have a ton of positive value? I'm not entirely sure right now, given the cap hit at $5.8 million. So this might be a situation where, like Brad Treliving has done multiple times this offseason, I mean, just kind of not finesse necessarily, but he's been getting players, specifically Dakota Joshua and players like that, for very cheap prospect capital, or I mean, they haven't really been actually no prospect capital, just picks, and then of course at the deadline they gave up the prospect capital. It's been really good. Can they do the same with Mittelstadt? Obviously, at this point, this would be the highest cap hit player they'd acquire this offseason if they go out and get him. But the value is the interesting thing regarding an actual trade. I think you can make him fit, but do you want to take on that cap hit? And if so, how much do you have to give up to get him?
Yeah, and I think that he comes with a bit of term, I guess, to a degree, so that is okay. And obviously, to make it a lot, he makes a lot of money, right? Like you would have to free up a lot more salary cap space than a lot of the other guys we've been mentioning that would probably make more sense for this team anyway, besides the salary cap. So that's something to consider as well. And like you mentioned, I think it's a good point. Like, I don't think he has positive value right now. I really don't, based on the season that he had last year. I don't think he's a bad player. And I do think that the Bruins would want some significant assets in return for this player. But again, you're not talking about Ben Danford. You're not talking about Easton Cowan here. Like, if you're trading those guys, you need a difference maker who's somewhat young that can come in and make an impact at the NHL level immediately. So you're not trading those two guys, but probably a lower level prospect I would imagine the Bruins are interested in. Like, no matter what their GM says, the Bruins are in a rebuild right now. They're not a very good team. They have to reset a little bit. And that's why they went out and got guys like Fraser Mitten in return for Brandon Carlo, because it just made sense for both teams with where they were going. So the Leafs have a history, last season trading with the Boston Bruins as well. They've done some trades in the past that maybe didn't work out for the Toronto Maple Leafs too well. But like you mentioned, the Leafs can free up some salary cap space with David Kemp, with Kelly Yarncroke. We've talked about Nick Robertson, what's happening with Bobby McMahon. They can free up some significant cap space if they wanted to make something like this happen. And of course, if you put Mittelstadt with a guy like Nylander, I feel like that would be a recipe for success just in terms of their style of play. But then I would be a little bit concerned about the defense and the physicality of a line like that. So that would be a huge question mark too. But Berube likes, his toolbox. He likes to go into his toolbox in terms of his lines and see, okay, I'm in a defensive zone faceoff. What line am I using here? Maybe it's my third line. Maybe it's my first line, right? Okay, we need a goal. Second line goes out, something like that. So he did that in St. Louis very well. So I could see that making some sense. But again, $5.7 million is a little steep for this player. And I don't see him having a positive value right now. So I feel like if you were to acquire this player, you would want to do it right now versus, in the past or even a year from now. You don't know what type of season he has, but it just doesn't work out for the Maple Leafs in my eyes, at least.
Yeah, I mean, would it be a trade for obviously Nick Robertson would probably be thrown in there. Maybe even Bobby McMahon, not necessarily a better player than Casey Middlestat, but a cheaper version that could be interesting in the Bruins system. Someone like that could make some sense. And you look at the Leafs depth chart, they could use a guy like Middlestat, but is the other external factors that make it more difficult. The cap hit, stuff beyond just the skill on the ice. So let us know down below what your thoughts are. He's a very good player. Kind of struggled actually with the Bruins, 6 points in 18 games. Before that, 34 points in 63 games. It'll be interesting to see. The Leafs have a lot of interesting depth and keep you up to date every step of the way with the actual route that they go surrounding upgrading their top six.